Hey guys, I have a few budget devices that we are going to be taking a look at today. I've been sitting on these for a while because frankly, I'm actually backed up. So today I'm going to be combining all of these into one video and we'll do sort of a mini review of each device. I have the Ibasso Junior Macaron dongle, the TempoTec Sonata BHD dongle, and the Tanchjim Mino TWS version TWS earphones. So I'm not going to be doing a deep dive on any of these devices, but of course I will try and cover all of the main features, but the main focus, of course, is going to be on sound, because at the end of the day, that's really all that matters. We have a lot to talk about, so let's get started. We'll start with the Ibasso Junior Macaron first. So this is a budget dongle and you can pick this up for around 50 bucks. So this is going to be competing with the SMSL D10, the Roselsa 9039, the DS2 by Fosse, Moondrop Dawn Pro, and I think the D10 is actually, of the bunch, is the most powerful. I think it's rated at about 500 milliwatts at 32 ohms with 2 volts RMS of level output. The Moondrop Dawn Pro has 120 milliwatts with 2 volts RMS. The Fosse DS2 has 170 milliwatts with 4 volts RMS. The RS 9039, 300 milliwatts. And I'm not sure what the level output of the 9039 is, but as far as where the Macaron lands, it's kind of right in the middle at 210 milliwatts of power. But it does have good level output. It's got 4 volts RMS. It uses dual Cirrus Logic CS43131 DAC chips, and it has both a 4.4 balanced and a 3.5 single-ended output, and it also has a physical volume rocker. And then there is, of course, a Type-C input on the top. And then it also comes with this short Type-C cable. But what's cool is that it's compatible with the Ibasso UAC app, and within the app itself, you can control the volume level, balance, plus you have access to 5 filters, high, medium, and low gain, and also turbo mode for the level output. Now, I should point out, you can only change the gain levels within the app itself, so there is no way to change the gain on the device itself. But let's go ahead and switch gears and talk about some of the features and specifications of the TempoTec Sonata BHD, because this is another dongle that I've had for quite a while, and it's priced very close to the Macaron, and it's also similar in its features and its specifications and just its overall performance in general. And right now it's priced at $45 on Amazon. So this does give you a little more power output at 280 milliwatts out of the balanced output compared with the Macaron's 210 milliwatts, but the max level output is the same. They both have 4 volts RMS. It also uses the same dual CS43131 DAC configuration. It also has a physical volume rocker, but it does add a physical 3-level gain control button, which I like a lot. That's this button right here. And it also has a Type-C input, of course, and then a 4.4 balanced and 3.5 single-ended output. Now, of course, I think it goes without saying that just because they both use the same DAC chip, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to have the same sound. Because while the DAC obviously plays a really large role in determining the device's sound performance, ultimately it's determined by all of the components working together and, of course, how well the DAC is implemented. Now, that said, these do actually sound almost identical, which is fine because they both sound very good. But we'll go ahead and talk about drivability and its use with full-size headphones first. So, of course, these being budget dongles, while they will drive most headphones as far as reaching good volume levels perfectly fine. For example, a budget set like the FIO FT1, which has a 32 ohm impedance and a 98 dB sensitivity, I was reaching pretty good volume levels with the Macaron at about 75 steps out of 150, and it was about the same with the Sonata. So both of these will easily power your typical budget headphone with no problem at all. And it was about the same with the Meze 99 Classics. Those are also a 32 ohm set with, I believe, a 103 dB sensitivity, also about the same with the Civga Lawan. That's a 38 ohm set with a sensitivity of 100 dBs, and I was getting decent volumes at about 75 to 80 steps out of 150 with the 109 Pros. So thanks to both of these offering pretty decent power output, and again, those 4 volts of RMS level output, as long as you don't have any super hard to drive sets, so high impedance, low sensitivity sets, you should have no issues reaching good volume levels. And even with my LCD3, I was reaching good listening levels at around 110 out of 150 steps. Now, of course, it's very unlikely anyone will be purchasing either of these with the intention of pairing it with a higher end headphone. But if by chance they did, it would most likely be able to drive them to decent listening levels as long as it's nothing too hard to drive. And it was with some of my higher end full-size sets where I did start to notice these starting to kind of reach their limitations a little bit. But let's go ahead and talk about their sound, and I'll also talk about where I feel like these really did actually shine. So as I said, both of these did quite well with my entry and mid-tier level, easier to drive full-size sets, but where they really shined were, of course, with IEMs. They both had way more than enough power to drive pretty much every IEM I paired them with, and as usual, I tested them with a lot of different IEMs, from budget stuff all the way up to my higher end set. So let's talk about the Macaron first. To my ears, its presentation is pretty linear, although if it does lean in either direction, I would say it leans maybe a little bright, because it does have just a little bit of an edge up top when compared to something like the Luna, which does tilt a little more towards a warmer presentation. And while I would say it still does a good job keeping things generally natural sounding, sometimes vocals and instruments can sound just a little less maybe weighty, again, when compared to something like the Luna, or I guess maybe a more appropriate comparison would be the Dawn Pro, because that's a little closer in price. And I have that right here, but I do feel like the Dawn Pro has a little more, maybe a little more weight and richness in its presentation, which I actually do prefer. And another dongle that I reviewed a while back that reminds me of the Macaron is the Fozzy Audio DS2, because it's very similar in that it also does lean a little more bright in its presentation as well. And I'm kind of getting the same impression with the Sonata as well. I just feel like it's not quite as weighty in its presentation and has just a slight edge up top. But both of these are still what I would consider to be pretty decent overall. They've got good detail, they're fairly transparent, and their performance is certainly good enough to justify their asking price. Now, I should state that I do still feel like if you've got the budget for it, the Onyx Alpha XI1 is still one of the best all-around values out there. For around $100, you get 500 milliwatts of power output plus a screen, and it sounds as good as dongles that cost twice as much. Plus, the build and the design are just great. That said, again, I do feel like both of these are good dongles, and for their price point, there isn't really anything that I can really complain about. On the contrary, actually, I think they're both very good values, and they offer features and performance easily worthy of their price points. Okay, so next I have the Tanchjim Mino Tanch TWS earphones. And of course, as I'd mentioned earlier, we're not going to be covering all of the features, but I will make sure and touch on the main points and mostly just be focusing on the sound. So this is currently priced at $48 and it is a stem style TWS. It has this charging case. It only decodes some of your more basic Bluetooth codecs like SBC and AAC, so it does not support LDAC or any of the other higher resolution codecs. That said, the Bluetooth connection itself is very stable and I didn't have any issues with connectivity at all. It also has touch controls on the earpieces that can be customized within the Tanchjim app. Speaking of the app, it also gives you access to different listening modes like ANC and transparency mode. It gives you access to battery levels, firmware upgrades. But what I think makes this particular TWS a little bit of a standout within this price range are some of the EQ presets and the EQ customization that is available within the app itself. And I'll just go ahead and jump into sound right here because that is how I was actually able to achieve what I felt was pretty good sound with the Mino, at least in terms of its tuning. But just to give some idea of what you can expect right out of the box, its tuning is going to be a little more mid-forward with a more neutral bass presentation. So the bass energy is going to be relaxed and vocals are going to be more forward. And the treble is also going to have a little bit of a smoother but non-fatiguing presentation as well. So relaxed bass, smooth treble, and some extra mid-range and vocal energy. Now, one thing I did notice right away is how natural everything sounded out of the box. And I do think that most listeners will find its default tuning to be fairly pleasing. However, for me, I did find myself wanting a little more bass, and that's where I found that the EQ was quite handy. Now, I need to preface this by saying, on top of me not being a Bluetooth guy, I'm also not an EQ guy. Basically, all of my listening is with my IEMs in their default tuning, because while I do have a lot of IEMs with many different types of tuning, with my higher end sets, I typically don't want to mess with that. I like to experience an IEM how it was intended to be experienced and without any modification or manipulation of its tuning. That said, this particular set, I'm sure, intended on some listeners wanting to use EQ in order to tailor the sound to their preference. But for me, if I need to use Bluetooth at all on a walk or run or hike or whatever, my go-to Bluetooth device is the FIO UTWS5 because I can pair it with basically any 2-pin IM that I want. And then I don't have to worry about EQ at all. That said, when I was going through the different available EQ options, I was pleasantly surprised at how close the vocal EQ preset brought the Mino to my tuning preference, because it didn't really change much in the top half of its tuning, but it did add that nice small amount of bass that I felt was lacking in its default tuning mode. Now, of course, there are, I think, a total of 8 presets that add basically like varying degrees of bass energy, but the vocal preset has the most bass and it sounded the most balanced overall to me. I should, however, point out that bass dynamics were maybe a little lacking. It did have some impact in slam, but it was just okay for me. And it doesn't really give me the same amount of impact, the same amount of dynamic satisfaction I'm used to achieving, even with many of my budget wired sets. Now, of course, you can also customize your own 5-band EQ, and additionally, they have an EQ forum in the app that allows you to download other users' EQs, or you can share your own EQ preset. But I did not go that far. And while I did mess with the custom EQ a little bit, I found myself being pretty satisfied, I guess, overall with the vocal EQ preset. It gave me a little more of that bass energy that I was looking for. Vocals and instruments still had good energy, and kept that natural presentation, but they weren't overly forward. Now, I think the treble was where I found myself maybe not being able to really find satisfaction, because while I did hear some upper treble energy, it was still a little too relaxed for me. And even when I tried to mess with the treble using the EQ, I wasn't really able to reconcile some of the issues I was experiencing in the treble. And some of those issues were primarily centered around its general lack of detail and the micro details. But beyond that, just the general technical performance. So soundstage, imaging, layering, which I guess were pretty decent considering it's a budget set, but still what I would consider to be maybe about average for this price point. Now, I need to clarify, these are all very common issues with Bluetooth earphones. So by no means is the Mino performing below my expectations. On the contrary, again, I do feel like the EQ customization and EQ presets do add a little extra value proposition, and I do feel like the Mino Asano Tanch is generally a pretty decent value overall. So that concludes my reviews of the Tanchjim Mino Asano Tanch, the Ibasso Macaron, and TempoTec Sonata BHD. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch. If you like my content, please take a second and hit that subscribe button. Also, if you would please comment on this video, please like this video, please share this video. I hope you have an awesome day.